It was fun to make, but I'm certainly not wearing it to the grocery store. Come watch me knit another basic sweater. Let's knit another one of those bad boys.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thanks so much for coming to hang out with me for another video today. I am so excited to finally sit down and reflect on all of my 2023 knitting choices that have kind of led me into the goals and the intentions and the ideas that I'm taking with me into 2024 so that I can be a better knitter, I can be a better crafter, a better YouTuber, all of these things that I've just really been trying to look at and piece through and inform my choices moving forward when it comes to this craft of knitting. So I feel like we should just go ahead and dive on in. These are some things that I think some of them I already had on my mind in the end of 2023, which, by the way, was my very first year of knitting. And then some of these other realizations or epiphanies that I've had have come after seriously sitting down and looking back at the past year and also looking at the holes in my wardrobe, but also in my skill set and all of those sort of things, and like combining them into one just general. I really don't want to use the word goals. I also don't want to use the word intentions. I feel like this is more of just like a guide for myself, maybe like my map for knitting in 2024 and the different journeys that I'd like to go on. But also, if I don't make it to a destination, that's okay. We could try again next year. So nothing here is concrete. These are just some of the things that I've had on my mind after looking at it, and also in no particular order. So like I said, let's go ahead and dive on in. So starting out with a actual skill or technique in knitting, one of the biggest things that I would love to dabble in this year is color work. In my first year of knitting, I feel like I got a good handle for texture and cabling, and I dabbled a tiny bit in lace. But the one thing I just did not go anywhere near was color work. And honestly, lately I have been saving so many different color work patterns on Instagram and Ravelry that not only do I want to just like embark on the skill, but also I'm itching to cast on one of these projects. So while I don't think it will be a part of my first few whips of 2024, it's definitely something that I'm planning on engaging with. And so that being said, I also wanted to utilize this fantastic audience that I have to ask you if you have more experience in color work. I am basically at a point where I've never investigated it. I've only heard the terms thrown out like mosaic and stranded and intarsia. So if you feel like you have some advice on where a beginner should start in color work and which of these things would be a good place to start, then I would love to hear from you down in the comments. And otherwise, I'll just kind of be piecing through the patterns, like I said, that I've already been saving. And maybe I will look further into those and see if it's like one technique more so than another, or just genuinely I'll pick my favorite and we'll learn whatever color work technique comes along with it. But that is definitely something that I have on my mind that I would like to learn in 2024. As far as looking at gaps in my wardrobe, specifically my knitted wardrobe, I do feel like while I had a lot of fun knitting some really thematic and exciting and like very holiday pieces in 2023. I do feel like 2024 is going to be the year of the basics for me. I really do feel like I need more practical knitwear in my wardrobe. And this is including like my store-bought knitwear as well as my handmade. I do feel like I have some holes where I already know one of the patterns that I will be knitting this year is the Caramello sweater by Claudia Quintanilla of Unit Toronto. It's a very basic, just like grab and go sweater. And I already bought the yarn in a really nice, rich sort of charcoal gray. I feel like that's something that my wardrobe is just needing. So I'm excited to get to that, but also just more like plain, simple cardigans and honestly just plain sweaters without a turtleneck, maybe even a few summer basics. I am the kind of person who tends to just like get excited about a hobby and I will skip the whole beginning phase and just dive into like the fun stuff. When I first learned how to sew, the literal like first garment that I made was this like floral applique gown. It was fun to make, but I'm certainly not wearing it to the grocery store. So I do just feel like I would love to make some more everyday or more practical garments for myself. Now, kind of in that same hand, I'm looking at these things from the perspective of being someone who's sharing my knitting journey online. And so while I have a gap in my wardrobe and I have a need for more practical garments, I don't want to ignore the fact that that's not exactly the most like exciting and like, come watch me knit another basic sweater. And so, one of the ways that I feel like I can keep things fresh and relative to you guys over here, as well as continue to peruse and experiment with different designers and styles and constructions is I would really love to avoid knitting the same pattern twice. Now, I know that this is counterintuitive to your average maker. You consider buying a knitting pattern and how you could use it in multiple different ways. And I feel like if I was not sharing these makes on the internet here, that is the way that I would probably go. However, I do like to keep things exciting and new and fresh. And if I'm going to keep talking about my knitting, I feel like I should have something different to talk about. And so I'd love to experiment with not knitting the same pattern twice. And so that could mean knitting two basic raglan sweaters, but from different designers, different gauges. And like I said, that's for both you and me. I'm a new knitter, so I still haven't totally figured out my favorite construction to wear, be it a drop shoulder or a raglan, or I really haven't done much circular yoke at all. And then also I don't want to fall into a trap of constantly knitting the same knitwear designer because I haven't tried enough yet to say that one is better than the others. Although you know already that if I were to say there was one, it's Magdalena Parker. But really, I feel like every time I try a new knitwear designer, I read a pattern and I come away with something that I loved and didn't love about it. And so I should keep doing that until I find one that I like. And also, if I ever want to dabble myself in the designing world, I feel like it's so important to get a really broad spectrum of all the ways that people write a pattern, design a sweater, design a garment, design whatever. And then also, like I said, to keep things kind of fresh over here for you guys. So that's actually something I'm very excited about because typically I would not like indulge and allow myself to do that, but I am using this platform to kind of give myself the leeway to allow myself to kind of like have a little frivolous fun and try all sorts of new things. So I think that that will be really fun this year. So I do have a lot of garments that I would love to make this year in my life. and it's just impossible for me to get through all of them. But I know that the best way I could set myself up for success in getting through these projects that I really want to make is by doing a bit of WIP management. Now, this is something that I'm going to be sort of playing with throughout the year, and then hopefully at the end of the year, I'll have some takeaways as far as what worked and what didn't work about the different styles that I try of managing WIPs. But going into the new year, my intention with WIPs is to not have more than one garment on the needles at a time. And so what I imagine my WIP pile will look like is a garment, as in a sweater, and then maybe an accessory at the same time. Within those sort of parameters, I further have, I think one of those should always be stockinette in the round, preferably. And so maybe I'll even allow myself that if neither of them are, to have a sort of deadline free in the round, just stockinette project going. I've found over the past few months that as soon as I get a project on my needles, I tend to just want to, like, I hyper focus on it. And so, as much as I'd love to finish another project, the course having cardigan, I can't. Like, once the momentum's going, I'm in. Everything's good. And as soon as it's stunted, I like kind of have no interest in finishing it as much as I want it finished. So I feel like the best move is going to be to whittle down to a single garment, a single accessory, and have the garment for when I have my focused and in-depth knitting time, and then the accessory or that more stackinette in the round project as my more on the go or mindless or TV knitting. That's kind of my thought going into it. And I'm hoping that at the end of the year, I'll be able to see that if what I think is true, I feel like I should be able to actually accomplish more, but in a less stressful way. I also feel like that gives me the opportunity to get halfway through a project and decide that I don't like it and just say, okay, then we don't have to do that anymore. Like, there's no plan B where I'm kind of like, oh, I just won't work on that right now, because that's how things fall by the wayside. And for me, I don't have the space in this place to store unfinished projects. So that is just another sort of goal that I'm keeping in mind, and will tweak and figure out more in depth throughout the year, but that's how I'm going into it with my WIP management. Now, this is one that I feel like I haven't really heard people talk about, but it's going along sort of with my one WIP at a time rule. I'm going to call it one WIP at a time because that's what I'm saying, is I'm going to hyper focus on like one bigger piece at a time. We'll just have something like to have without a deadline on the side. So with having this one WIP at a time rule, I feel like I have a good bit of yarn in my stash that I still want to use. And so I like the idea of sort of assigning a pattern or even a few ideas of patterns to the yarn that I have in my stash, and then letting it sit there so that when I finish one WIP or as I'm finishing up a WIP, I can decide in that moment, what am I craving on the needles next? So essentially, I'm trying to avoid saying, I like to knit, this sweater by the end of January, and that's when I'm going to start doing this sweater. And then once that's done, I want to start this project. And then when that's done, I'm going to start this project, because I already can tell that by the end of one of those projects, if I'm not in the mood to knit the next thing on my list, it's going to throw the whole schedule out of whack, and then I'm going to be upset about it. So instead, I'd like to have the options of, I have this sweater's quantity to do a cable knit sweater, but I just did a cable knit sweater, so maybe not that right now. Or maybe I'm freaking loving cables at the moment. Let's knit another one of those bad boys. Or I just got off of knitting 3 different neutral colored sweaters, and I really need some color in my life. So good thing I've got this red yarn over here that I could grab and go with that. And so that's kind of the loose structure that I'm going to try and keep, where I have these projects sort of ready to go, the yarn, the patterns at any given time, but without, while doing my best to not enforce such strict guidelines or deadlines on those projects. Obviously, there are certain things, and I also have some intentions to do a little bit more gifting this year. So there will be things that have deadlines. But for example, at the moment, I'm knitting a sweater for my dad for his birthday. His birthday is at the end of the month. And I have an idea of what I'll start after it, but I'm not locked in. And originally, my idea was to go from knitting my dad's sweater into knitting, like I had mentioned already, my caramello sweater. However, my dad's sweater is being knit in a charcoal gray yarn. It's pretty simple. Raglan increases, stockinette. There's some ribbing in there, but it's really nothing major. And I can already tell that I'm craving something a little bit more engaging once this project is over. And I also don't want to look at charcoal yarn again for a little bit. So that's kind of what I have on my mind at the moment. And yeah, the main point just being that I'd like to keep some things on hand, some projects in the back of my head, but then still get that excitement of like shopping around for a new cast on once I've wrapped up a project. Now, the next 2 goals or intentions that I have on my list are probably the most like loose and more just, yeah, well, if we get to that, but who knows what that could turn into. And the first one being I've just listed to go rogue. I I can't really say whether or not I could see myself getting really into knitwear designing. However, it's something that's on my mind. If you've watched me for some time, you already know that I love to modify a pattern. I also have these like big ideas of what patterns could be, and I see a pattern and think, well, if I did this differently, maybe it could be like this. So I feel like that's sort of brewing inside of me. Um and it's interesting that with knitwear, there's a hesitation, whereas in crochet, I never followed a pattern. I followed one pattern in my whole crochet life. And other than that, it was just like making up sweaters as I felt it. Same with kind of in sewing. I followed a few sewing patterns, but I've also had a lot of fun just playing around and sewing up some fabric into whatever the heck I want to. So I would like to at some point in 2024 go rogue and just knit something. And I I think that my approach to that will be very similar to how I started knitting in the first place, where if I say go rogue on a sweater, it does not need to be my absolute favorite sweater in the end. It does not need to be released as a design. It does not need to see the light of day. I just want to see and I don't know, see what I think about coming up with my own pattern for a sweater or anything else really, but I think I'm a sweater knitter. Accessories haven't really done it for me yet. So that's just something a little bit more vague, but that's a more ambitious goal and a looser one at that too. So that is something I'd like to do in 2024. We'll see. And then this I feel like is just the natural progression for most knitters. You play with the yarn, you wanna know more about the yarn, you wanna make the yarn. And this is a tricky one for me because watching other people spin and make their yarn, I I know most people say that you should start with a drop spindle, and I have absolutely no interest in doing that. It's one of those things that I feel like if I had a drop spindle, I'd play with it for a day, and then I'd wind up chucking that thing in a closet somewhere, and I wouldn't see it for another 10 years. So, that's tricky because, the drop spindle is definitely the more approachable or the more like sensible approach into spinning. Whereas I would really love to try spinning on a wheel. There's something that looks really relaxing about that. Now, that being said, too, I can't imagine actually having a spinning wheel in this house where we are. There's just not enough room for something like that. But I wonder if I could find somewhere, maybe if you know somewhere in Connecticut where I could go outside of my home to spin on a wheel. Because I think that that would just be fun to try, but not necessarily like turn into a spinner full time. Just to like, once in a while spin something up. I think that that could be really fun, and furthermore, just like when I see something and I get such a specific idea about it, I feel that way with yarn. I feel that way with patterns. And so I feel like to get into some spinning would scratch that itch of being able to make something that I haven't seen before that I see inside of my brain. Whereas it's so interesting because dyeing is another thing that, as a hairstylist, I never did color. I hate doing color. I do it for some friends and family, but otherwise, I don't know, the whole color thing, just I never got into it. So I can't see myself dyeing yarn, but I could definitely see myself playing around with spinning some yarn. So I feel like those are my general knitting. That's the map. I don't know kind of which way we're gonna go on the map. But as far as being like a knitter, those are my plans, my intentions. There's like another word, right? There's another word that I'm looking for to use here. My I don't know, like my 2024 knitting inspo. I know that there's a word here, but I can't find it. And then so that's kind of also all separate to YouTube. I do have a lot of really big goals for this channel. Hello, Osi. I guess we have a lot of big goals for the channel. Um, and so just to keep you in the loop, I am really trying to get on a good schedule with putting out videos twice a week because I think that that's fun. And I'd like to experiment even more with my secondary videos and the range of topics that I'd kind of like to cover in them. I feel myself wanting to go down this route of more in-depth and sort of investigative knitting content. So that's all something that I'm kind of working on and that's brewing in my head. But just to keep you in the loop of, I'm not planning to go anywhere. I'm going to stick around here as long as you guys want to hang out with me. So I feel like that I have to include as part of my knitting goals are my content goals and my channel goals. So those things I'm trying to find a balance, and I really do feel like after I sat down and reflected on these things, I did find I've kind of struck that in between of what's going to satisfy me as a creator, as a maker, what's going to satisfy me as a channel operator, and hopefully what's going to satisfy you as a viewer, as a hanger outer. And so I hope that you can sense that as I'm coming up with these intentions and goals, that I'm keeping you in the loop the whole time and I'm keeping you in my thoughts and in the mix because you are now officially a part of my knitting journey, whether you like it or not. So, yeah, those are kind of my knitting intentions. I also just wanted to take a second to tell you kind of how I was able to look at this. So, if you haven't seen it already, I posted my 2023 everything I knit this year. And of course that's sort of like the norm in the knitting podcasting world. Now, while I don't expect just every knitter to be at home, like pulling out everything you've ever knit this year and trying it on and talking about it, I do urge you to sit down and really take a look, whether that be virtually, so via your Ravelry or just your notes, or, whether that be paper even. But if you can really sit and physically look at your knits and assess them a little bit, some of the things that I took away from making my Everything I Knit This Year video were things like yarn makeup and how that affected the wear of an item as far as my frequency of wearing it. I noticed things like the color and how that would affect the way that I was wearing certain things. I was taking notice of the fits and the constructions that I was wearing more. And so all of those things are just kind of floating around in the back of my head as different ways that can guide me through making more informed knitwear decisions in 2024. I also, because this has been my first year of knitting, I'm trying to take those as just things to hold in the back of my head and not an end all be all. For example, I found that the one of my most worn finished objects was my Minto sweater, which is a cable knit sweater. And that was knit out of some yarn called Must Be Merino. I got it on clearance at Hobby Lobby. And it has a merino, nylon, there might be acrylic in there, but more of like a budget makeup to it. And I found that I wore that sweater a lot. And I think part of the reason is because I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid of taking care of it. I wasn't afraid if something happened to it because it wasn't the fanciest yarn. And I think that's just part of who I am. It's part of why I like thrifting for yarn and finding things secondhand in just life, because if it kind of came to me already with a little use, I can't possibly ruin it the first time myself. So that's one of those things that I'm just keeping in the back of my head. Whereas maybe the finer quality yarns that I used, like the Malabrigo Susurro that I used in my ranunculus, I'm a little more hesitant to wear that because I don't want to wear that to work and get hairspray on it or something like that. Whereas really my overarching goal of 2024 is to wear the things I knit the things I love, and continue to figure out the more specifications in those categories. So, my point being, if you can take a moment to reflect on the things that you've knit in your life, but specifically more recently, and do you wear them? If you do, why? If you don't, why? And really evaluate, is it the color? Is it the yarn? Is it the price? Is it the pattern, the construction? What are those things that are becoming recurring themes in your own knitwear? And I hope that that can help you to get to the end of 2024 and look at everything that you've made and say, wow, I do really love all of this. And yeah, I feel like I'm fortunate that most of the things I knit in 2023, I really do love. And I guess I didn't realize how rare that was until I saw other people's Everything I Knit in 2023 video. But I think that also just comes from a place of me knowing my own style and how I like to wear things. So anyway, I'm just rambling now, but these have been my sort of roadmap of knitting intentions and things that I'm going to keep in the back of my own head to help guide me in making better decisions on what to knit in 2024. So I hope that this was maybe interesting. Hope maybe this was fascinating for you. And yeah, if you enjoy this style of content, if you like knitting content in general, I'd love it if you would give this video a thumbs up. You could subscribe, you could ring that bell so you can be notified when videos just like this one go live. And otherwise, I'd love if you'd come hang out with me on Saturday mornings when I post my weekly podcast at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And yeah, I think that's everything I have for you today. Big ol' thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. All right, you guys. Bye!